Hello and welcome to this evening's Sustainable House Day 2020 extension session. My name is Anna Cumming and I will be your MC for tonight. This is our final webinar after our all-day event on Sunday the 20th of September. We hope some of you had the chance to attend that event. This session will focus on the nationwide House Energy Rating Scheme, or NatHERS, Australia's star rating system that rates the energy efficiency of a home based on its design. Sustainable House Day, which has run for 20 years now, is a national event organised by Renew that aims to inspire people to live more sustainably through sharing peer-to-peer knowledge and experiences in sustainable housing. On behalf of Sustainable House Day and Renew, I would like to acknowledge that the event is taking place on the traditional lands of many Aboriginal and/or Torres Strait Islander people. I am speaking on the traditional lands of the Wurundjeri Woiwurrung people of the Kulin Nation. We acknowledge them as the traditional owners of the land and pay our respects to elders past, present and emerging. We would like to extend that respect to all Aboriginal and/or Torres Strait people, including those we have with us on the panel or in the audience today. We thank them for their continuing connection to land, waters and community, which has existed for many thousands of years as the oldest living culture on Earth. We acknowledge the pivotal role that Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people continue to play in caring for country across Australia. Sovereignty on these lands has never been ceded and treaties are yet to be negotiated. This always was and always will be Aboriginal land. We recognise that this being a national event, we are each tuning in from different parts of the country. We invite you to share what traditional country you're watching from this evening in the chat. As tonight's MC, I will be facilitating the discussion using your questions. So to ask a question, please use Zoom's Q&A function, which you can find at the bottom of your Zoom window in your toolbar. If you'd like to react to something you see today or share your own experiences, feel free to use Zoom's chat function by clicking the chat button at the bottom of your Zoom window in your toolbar. If you'd like everyone watching to see your chat, select all panellists and attendees in the drop-down box above the text field. We ask that you do not direct any questions to panellists in the chat. These should all go in the Q&A box only, just to keep our lives simple on the back end. This event would not be possible without the support of our members and sponsors, who you can find on the Sustainable House Day website. So now let's get started. To introduce myself properly, I'm Anna and I'm the editor of Sanctuary Modern Green Homes magazine, published by Renew, the organisers of Sustainable House Day. I have a long-standing interest in sustainable, energy-efficient and comfortable homes that tread lightly on the earth, and I really love being part of the mission to inspire and educate people about the design strategies, assessment tools and materials available to achieve them. If you're a regular Sanctuary reader, you will likely have noticed that as part of our Sustainable House profiles each issue, we report on an energy rating for each house, a figure of 7 or 7.5 stars, frequently over 8 and sometimes even 10 stars. This is the home's NatHERS rating, an assessment out of 10 of its energy efficiency based on its design. The mandatory minimum rating for new homes is currently 6 stars. The nationwide House Energy Rating Scheme is administered by the federal government's Department of Industry, Science, Energy and Resources. By estimating a home's potential heating and cooling energy use, it helps to make Australian homes more comfortable to live in and also helps people save on energy bills through smarter design choices. As we know well at Sanctuary, often good design can reduce the energy needed to keep a home comfortable, with no or very little additional construction cost. I'm delighted to be here tonight with representatives from the NatHERS operations team and CSIRO for this presentation and discussion. We'll be focusing on what the NatHERS Framework is and how it works, how it can be used to greatest effect to ensure an energy efficient result, and what the future holds for its further development. We'll also hear about the science behind home energy rating tools like NatHERS. So joining me tonight, firstly, we have David Rochford, Assistant Manager of the NatHERS Operations Team at the Department of Industry, Science, Energy and Resources. David has extensive experience in energy efficiency regulations and test standards for space and water heating and cooling appliances in both residential and commercial settings. David's background is in applied science, and prior to his career in the public service, he worked as a park ranger, wildlife researcher, community education ranger, and primary school teacher. We also have Anthony Wright, who is research lead in the Building Simulation and Communication section of CSIRO. Anthony has a background in criminology, philosophy, natural resource management, building design, project management, and policy development. He currently leads a team delivering residential energy efficiency programs for CSIRO. And so to bring you our presentations for this evening, I'm going to hand over first to David. So, hi David, welcome.
G'day Anna, thank you. Thank you for that introduction.
No problem at all. I am going to turn my camera off now and let you share screen and take it away.
Okay, thank you very much. Just bear with me while I share my screen here. Hopefully that's not working, is it? Try that again. Here we go. There we go. Sorry about that. Thank you very much, everyone, for joining us tonight. It's a real honour to be here. Coming to you from Canberra, Ngunnawal country. It was really cool to see some of the places through the list there. People typing in. One jumped out at me there, Larrakia. I spent 10 years in Darwin, so love that place. And so hi to you there in Darwin, whoever's watching. As Anna said, I've done a fair bit of talking to people, whether it be as a park ranger or a school teacher, a community education ranger, but this is my first ever webinar. So I'm pretty excited to do that, and to be reaching so many parts, so many people in so many places at once is fantastic. So yeah, thank you everyone for coming. Tonight I'll be basically, just quickly run you through what I'll be talking about. First of all, I'll just go through a couple of elements of the NatHERS scheme, just to tell you what it is, and probably some of the things you might be recognise the star rating, but there's some other things there that you may not be familiar with or realise that we do. Then I'll go on and talk about how an assessment is done, so an energy rating assessment, and how the software works. And while I'm at it, hopefully, share with you this amazing software tool that we have in Australia, the NatHERS, the Nationwide House Energy Rating Tool or scheme, and the tool that underpins it. And you'll get a better understanding of how comprehensive and complex the system is, and how hopefully you'll see how how amazing this tool is, and how it condenses all the complexity of a house rating into a star rating, essentially, which then even all members of the public can generally relate to. And finally, I'll just quickly sort of point to some of the things that are ahead for us in the NatHERS scheme, and some of the things we're looking at implementing in the coming years. So first of all, Anna sort of covered some of the elements of this, really. And the NatHERS scheme is a star rating scheme that rates the energy efficiency of a home based on its design. And the star rating is based on the predicted total amount of energy the house will use in a year to keep it thermally comfortable. A low star rating is indicative of a poorly designed house, or poorly insulated house, or poor performing house, and that's going to use a lot of energy to keep your family warm and comfortable. Conversely, something with a high star rating is something that's going to a design that's going to keep you comfortable and minimize your energy costs in terms of heating and cooling. So this little Venn diagram here sort of shows a little bit of the broader context of the scheme. So first of all, there is that the top little circle there, the communities and processes, communications and processes. That consists of the rating, the NatHERS certificate, the report, technical notes. We have an assessor handbook and data collection. Down there on the left, we have the accreditation of software tools. So the scheme, we don't actually operate or sell or manage the tools ourselves. The scheme actually accredits software tools against a software accreditation protocol to ensure all the tools deliver consistent results. So we have, at the moment, PERS Pro, First Rate 5 and Hero software have demonstrated that they can produce consistent results with CSIRO's Accredited, which is the benchmark tool. And then that final little circle there is the accreditation of assessor accrediting organisations, or AAOs for short. So the scheme accredits these organisations who themselves accredit the assessors to use NatHERS software tools to ensure they follow the NatHERS procedures and deliver consistent and reliable results. This here is an example of a NatHERS certificate produced by an accredited or a NatHERS accredited assessor. You might see up here the very familiar logo, which you might see behind me as well. We've got the banner there. This is in colour, and this certificate here, the colour, the logo, they indicate that this is done by an accredited assessor. Some other features that you'll notice are down here is this QR code. If you scan that with your smartphone or smart device, it'll actually take you to the portal where the certificates are stored, and you can download a PDF. So this is good if you have a hard copy, or part of your plans. You can actually scan that QR code, and you can ensure that the certificate, the hard copy that you've got, is a genuine one, and then you've got access to an online or electronic copy of the thing as well. You should always insist on getting a copy of the NatHERS certificate when you buy a new home, so that you can confirm that the certificate is genuine, and that the materials that you can start to see on this front page, some of the details about the design and location of the house, that they're all correct, and what the certificate says in terms of the materials are actually what you've got in your home. For instance, that's where you can check what type of windows were used in the rating, or what type of insulation, and then you can sort of confirm that you've got those things. So very important to to ask for these certificates. This next one here, it's not quite as pretty as the last one. This is actually a NatHERS certificate by a non-accredited assessor. It's you can't print it in colour. It's all black and white. It doesn't have our logo. It does still have the star rating here. If this one is a 6-star, as you can see where my mouse is pointing. But very importantly, it still does have the QR code. So that will allow you to ensure that, again, if you've got a hard copy of this certificate, that it's a genuine one, and that then you can be assured that everything that's on the certificate, hopefully is then also in your house. It also, down the bottom, there's a bit of a warning that talks about non-accredited assessors. Now, most jurisdictions in Australia still allow you to use a non-accredited assessor, but I suppose we wouldn't generally recommend them. And I'll tell you a little bit why in the next slide. Okay. This is talking about the NatHERS accredited assessors and why you should be insisting on them. Basically, they're qualified. They are a member of one of those AAO, the Assessor Accrediting Organisations, and they are subject to quality assurance processes such as an AAO code of conduct. There's assessment rules that are enforced. There's oversight. There's quality assurance checks and forensic auditing of submitted work. They must have public indemnity insurance, and they have access to continuing mentoring, support, and there are obligations on continual professional development every year. So they're not just resting on their qualification, that certificate 4 in NatHERS thermal assessment. They actually have obligations for every year to make sure that they're keeping up with the latest changes in software and all that sort of stuff. So these are the things that non-accredited assessors don't necessarily need. So what we're saying is that an accredited assessor is a much less risky prospect than someone who hasn't necessarily got any of these checks or balances against them. So there are, and I'll just quickly mention them there. At the moment, we have 3 AAOs, and that's ABSA, who have been around for a very long time, Design Matters, or formerly BDAV, and a fairly new AAO, HERA, the Home Energy Raters Association. So they're if you're when you're employing an assessor, really it is best to make sure that they are accredited, but with one of those 3 bodies. Right, just wanted to talk a little bit to put it all in context about the NatHERS, what we are, the National Construction Code, and another one that a lot of people are familiar with, the BASIX, or the Building Sustainability Index for New South Wales. So basically, NatHERS is the rating tool. It's a measuring tape essentially, and it's a measuring tape of the building's energy efficiency. It is a recognised compliance pathway in the National Construction Code, meaning you can use your NatHERS rating to show you comply with the minimum energy efficiency requirements of your state or territory's building regulations for new homes. Generally speaking, this is a 6 stars for a freestanding house or townhouse. For an apartment block, the average star rating of all the individual apartments still needs to be a minimum of 6, but individual apartments can be as low as 5. And this is to recognise that if you've got an apartment block, the buildings facing north, for instance, it's very easy to get, because of the good solar access, it's easy to get a good rating, and 6 is very easy. But on the south side, say in a colder climate where the sun basically never comes in, this recognises that it is harder to get a good rating on that side of the building, for instance. So as long as the entire building's apartments average out at 6, that's generally the requirement. So you know sometimes you often get a situation where the north-facing apartments are closer to 7, and then the south-facing apartments are closer to 5. So if you're buying an apartment block, it's always really good to ask for the individual certificate for the apartment that you're looking at, because I can guarantee that they will have different ratings, and maybe the salespeople just tell you about the 6-star average, and you need to be aware that if you're buying on a certain side of the apartment block, it may not be as good as on the other side. So the other thing I wanted to mention here was that the New South Wales requirements are quite different. They have this that the home must meet the requirements of the Building Sustainability Index, or BASIX. So BASIX sets requirements for both energy and water use. All apartments in New South Wales and most houses use the NatHERS certificate to demonstrate compliance with the New South Wales energy use requirements. BASIX actually only uses part of the NatHERS assessment, not the star rating. It actually, these two numbers down here that I'm just waving my mouse over, these are the heating and cooling loads, which if you quickly do the maths, you'll see 106.7 plus 12.7 equals this number here. But they set separate requirements on the heating and cooling loads based on where you are in New South Wales. So that's you still need a certificate, and in New South Wales it does actually need to be done by an accredited, NatHERS accredited assessor. So even though the star rating isn't the mandatory part of the New South Wales requirements, the certificate is, and you should still ask for one, and you should see what it says. So all up, Australia-wide, at least 80% of Australian homes built each year, new homes built each year, and this is standalone homes and apartments, use the NatHERS certificate in one way or the other to demonstrate compliance to the energy efficiency requirements. But however, we're more than just minimum requirements. 6 is an okay score, but we would encourage you to go well beyond 6 if you can, and enjoy those benefits in added thermal comfort and lower energy bills if you can get it. So just there were a number of, thank you for all of the questions that were sent in, and I suppose there were a number that were asking around these requirements. So I sort of quickly, just a couple more points I'll add to this slide before we move on to try and better address some of those specific questions. So one of them was how were the stringency levels set? So I talked about this minimum 6-star sort of mark. Well, actually they're set by the Australian Buildings Code Board and mentioned in the National Construction Code. Now, the National Construction Code itself isn't a law. It actually has to be called into effect in each state and territory jurisdiction. So that's why New South Wales is a bit different. They went different to the rest of the country in terms of the NCC, but BASIX is still actually mentioned in the code. But yeah, so that's, the Building Code Board set those stringency levels, and in fact they're doing it again at the moment. They do it via a cost-benefit analysis, which is to answer another of those specific questions. They're doing what is called a regulation impact statement at the moment, and that will be released for public comment in May of next year. They have signalled, this is the Australian Building Code Board, they have signalled that they are looking at moving from 6 stars to 7 stars as the regulatory minimum. And that'll apply to apartments as well, an average of 7 with a minimum of 6. So they're busy doing the cost benefit of that, working out how much it's going to increase the cost of a home, and then looking at the benefits that would offset those costs. So it'll be the ABCB's job to decide whether 7 is the actual eventual number. If a question was about when this would happen, when would the next rise be? And if it all goes ahead, the new National Construction Code requirements would come in on the 1st of September 2022. And then there's generally, but not always, a period where you can apply to either the old code or the new code. So last time that was a 1-year transition period. So that may apply again this round, but that's how they're set. And as I said, that's, it's not a law. The NCC is not it's just a code. It's not legislation. All of the states and territories then call that up. Some of the variation that you see across the country is mentioned in the code, and then other variations occur at the last second when the state or territory decide to alter something for their own reasons when they call it into their own legislation. But all states and territories have agreed to try and move to a nationally consistent process for that. The other comment there were a few comments and questions around very specific specific things that NatHERS can't do very well. And I suppose I'd just make the point that NatHERS is designed for the mass market to help the majority of Australian homes to be better designed, more comfortable, and with cheaper heating and cooling costs. There are some unusual designs and materials that NatHERS maybe can't rate perfectly, or at least at the moment. However, there are other pathways to demonstrating compliance to your local building requirements apart from NatHERS. But like I said, most homes in Australia, the vast majority of them actually use this NatHERS pathway, but it's not the only way to demonstrate compliance. So if you do have concerns that that your design doesn't perform particularly well through NatHERS, but you have good evidence, or you believe that it is a very energy efficient design, there are other pathways that you can explore through the National Construction Code. All right. So before I move on to my next session, I actually was just thinking it might be worth a bit of a poll just for people you could fill in on the chat there. I'm just wondering how many of you who are homeowners and have built or bought a new home in recent years, how many of you have seen the certificate? How many of you got the certificate when all the paperwork and plans were handed over to you? Be interested to see if you type that into your chat, and I might get some of my colleagues here to maybe count up, and I'll report later. We'll get a bit of a picture of how many of you have seen that, seen an actual certificate in the real world. All right. So now I'll just go on to the assessment process and some practical actions that you can take and do a little bit of myth busting. So I've only been working in the NatHERS space for a couple of years, but I find the software's thoroughness and comprehensiveness fascinating. It's highly technical, but I'll do my best to explain some of the key features of how it works in lay terms, and hopefully bust about 5 myths while I'm at it. So hang on. Let's see. So currently, NatHERS assesses the thermal shell of the building. So that's the fabric, the building materials, but not the appliances. So NatHERS tools are basically sophisticated heat flow models. Heat moves from hot things to cooler things. For instance, if it's really hot outside, heat wants to move into your house. If it's really cold outside, and especially if you've got a heater on inside, heat wants to escape from your house. So that's a fairly simple physical principle, and NatHERS is really good at tracking that movement in and out and keeping track of temperatures. So some materials or building materials like insulation bats are good at resisting the movement of heat, while other materials like aluminium are very good at allowing heat to move through it. So NatHERS knows the thermal properties of most building materials, but it also measures heat movement through air, such as through leaks in the building fabric and open doors and windows. So the heat that it tracks and accounts for comes from outside air, temperature and humidity, comes from solar radiation, so that, the radiation from the sun's rays. And it also tracks the internal sources of heat, such as cooking, things like lights, and it even tracks the heat from people. It makes assumptions about where people are and, the heat that we put off and the moisture and humidity that we breathe out into the room. So through all that tracking of heat, coming and going through the building fabric, it calculates how much heat needs to be artificially added or removed to keep each room comfortable for every hour of the year. If you're having to add heat, that becomes part of your heating load, which you will have seen on the previous slide associated with the logo. And if you're having to remove heat, through an air conditioner, that's part of your cooling load. Now, this is about the actual assessment process. If you're designing your house, your NatHERS accredited assessor will enter your home specifications into the software. NatHERS, so things like, what it's made of, its layout, what direction it faces, where it is, its address in the country, and what surrounds it, what's going to cast shadow or shade on it. Now, NatHERS assessors are often called in to give the place a rating once the design is finished. However, it's really important to include them from the start so that they can help advise on climate and site-appropriate design features and materials before major decisions are made. Good design generally doesn't cost any extra, as Anna said there earlier. In fact, we'll give you a start. We'll give you some free 7-star house designs as a starting point. My colleagues will now post a website address in the chat for your home website that contains a number of free 7-star house designs. There's designs in there for all of the capital cities that fine-tunes it for the major climate zones of Australia. So yeah, when you've got a chance, have a look at those designs and you'll see how easy a 7-star design is. None of them have double glazed windows, for instance. It's just facing the house in the right way, putting the right size windows in the appropriate places, and appropriate shade, and 7 stars is actually very easy. So yeah, hopefully that'll come up in the chat and you can check that out at your leisure at some point. All right. Now, the other thing that the NatHERS software does is it sets out a schedule for every hour of your year and predicts how you will behave given the weather conditions at the time. Now, we're all different, and this schedule is unlikely to accurately represent anyone, but it does standardize things so that ratings between houses can be compared. Basically allows you to compare apples with apples. It tells you how the house will perform with an average user, noting that a house may be used by different owners over its lifetime. So that's the first set of assumptions it has to make. It also has to make assumptions about the climate, where the house is built, and the address. So the NatHERS software actually recognises 69 different NatHERS climate zones. You probably can't see them all at the scale of this little map. Some of them are very small. For instance, in Melbourne, there's one for Tullamarine, one for the built-up CBD, and then there's one out east based on the Moorabbin Airport sort of location. So you can't really see them too well here, but yeah, 69 in all, and there's a list of the things there that those files contain. So each zone has its own climate file. The file consists of what we call a representative meteorological year for that zone. So this is composed of historic data, and it's been assembled into a representative year composed of 12 different representative months. So for your location, looking at all of the historical months, January might be 1996, the real 1996 weather data, and then February might be 2001, etc. So that's how the climate file is put together. These climate files are actually fundamental to how your house design will perform. The differences in wind, solar radiation, angle of the sun, temperature and humidity means that any given house design will perform differently in each of these 69 climate zones. All right, this is the first of the myths that I wanted to talk about, that NatHERS doesn't reward good solar passive design. This is probably one of the most frustrating ones I've heard, and from a number of people, and it just couldn't be more wrong. NatHERS tools know exactly where the sun is for every hour of the year. They also know where all the relevant shadows are at any given time. So to get a good star rating, you must have at least some elements of good solar passive design. However, the star rating isn't all about, it's about how much artificial heating and cooling is required. So even in a pretty cold place like here in Canberra, you can let in too much sun. It's basically about getting good amounts of free heat from the sun in winter and keeping it out in summer. Furthermore, compared to an insulated wall, windows, especially poor quality ones, allow heat to escape relatively easily, especially like at overnight. So again, sometimes people forget that balance. Yes, you can get in all this great sun, but if it's all escaping through that flimsy glass all night, it may not be the right balance. So getting a NatHERS accredited assessor in early can help the building designer get these balances right. Now, when it comes to shading devices, windows, awnings, those sorts of things, you need to think like the NatHERS software tool to get the best out of your home. In summer, when it's hot, use those shading devices to keep the sun out. In winter, when it's cold, open those curtains to let the sunshine in. But when the sunshine's gone and it's a cold day, shut them again to help keep the warmth in. NatHERS assumes that you will be an active user and use your house in this way. Not perfectly, but pretty good. So make sure you are. Otherwise, you won't be getting the full benefits of what your house is capable of. Right, the second myth. This one, I've heard this a few times, especially from people up north. They go, it's hard to get 6 stars in a hot climate. Well, every climate zone actually has its own star rating scale. And we've just a little excerpt of one here. It recognises that it is harder to save heating and cooling energy in very hot or cold climates. Here are a couple of examples to illustrate my point. So a decent 6-star design is still going to need a lot of cooling in Darwin or a lot of heating in Thredbo. As you can see over here, the megajoules per square metres per annum figures, they're still pretty high for both Darwin and Thredbo. But Sydney is in between. It's the Goldilocks temperature. So a decent design isn't allowed to use much energy in comparison. So these star rating scales have been calibrated to ensure that a decent, well-designed, climate-appropriate home will always get a decent star rating, no matter where it is in the country. I should say mascot being Sydney for those that aren't. That's one of the 3 sort of Sydney zones. All right, the third myth that I wanted to talk about was that NatHERS doesn't recognise that I like the heat. Well, considering that NatHERS tools have to make a standardised assumption about what temperatures make us feel comfortable, they'll never be spot on because we're all different. However, it does use theories about adaptive comfort to customise the temperatures at which we decide to turn on the air conditioner, or at least which the software assumes we turn on the air conditioner. For example, it recognises that people that live in Darwin, up in Larrakia country, get used to hot conditions and can tolerate heat better than people that live in, say, Hobart. And these are the 2 examples I've given here. So we assume that Darwin residents turn on the air conditioner in their living room when it reaches 26.5 degrees inside, while we assume the poor Hobart residents feel like they're going to melt once the living room gets much above 23 degrees. So this gives us another clue about how we can all, act ourselves at home to make sure we are saving energy. So to save energy and achieve the real potential of your home's rating, you've got to be careful with how you set your thermostats. NatHERS assumes that 20 degrees is warm enough in winter. So if you set your thermostat above 20 degrees, you're already starting to use more energy than NatHERS predicts. Likewise, don't set your air conditioner thermostat too low in summer. NatHERS assumes that it would rarely be set below 25 degrees, depending on where you live. And essentially, the higher your air conditioner thermostat is, the more money you'll save. So there's some practical tips for you at home. Make sure you're, again, acting like NatHERS tools predict you to, because you'll save a lot more energy. All right. The next one I wanted to talk about was tropical design isn't rewarded, only eskies are. I've heard this one many times as well. So this one is especially from people living in the tropics. And look, to be honest, this myth is not without some foundation. Prior to 2006, the NatHERS tools of the time didn't have the best thermostat settings for the tropics, nor did they have very sophisticated ways to measure the movement of air within a home. So they didn't properly recognise the benefits of cross-flow ventilation or ceiling fans for that matter. But this is no longer the case. This picture here demonstrates this elements of tropical design that NatHERS will reward an appropriate climate. So things like the big verandas, the shade, the lots of openable windows, and I'm pretty sure if you look closely there, you can see a glimpse of some louver windows, very common in Darwin for letting through that breeze. So these things are all rewarded by the NatHERS software, as long as you're not so rewarded here in Canberra, but in a place like Darwin, they're the sorts of features that will get rewarded. And on that one, I just wanted to talk a little bit more about windows, doors, and fans. NatHERS actually attributes two benefits to an openable window or door. Firstly, it assumes that you open them when the conditions are right so that you can purge heat, like at night when it's been a hot day and it's a cool night. Open the windows and doors and the heat can escape. So it will give you that benefit. It'll go, right, you don't need to turn on the air conditioner now. We can open everything up, get rid of the heat naturally. Secondly, if there is a breeze coming through that window or door, it makes you feel cooler as it blows across your skin, just like this fan is doing to this little critter here. It's not cooling the air, but the air movement makes you feel more comfortable. Therefore, openable doors and windows and ceiling fans make you feel more comfortable and can negate or at least delay the use of an air conditioner. The presence of these features in your design modify those cooling thermostat settings I showed you earlier. So it assumes that even for a Darwin person, actually you can tolerate it a bit hotter than 26.5 if you have a fan on, or if you have openable windows and the climate file says at that time there's wind blowing through them in that direction. So yeah, it's very sophisticated now, the way it assumes comfort and will try and make it so that air conditioner isn't the first choice for cooling yourself down. And this is very important behavior to replicate in your house. Use your openable doors and windows and ceiling fans when it is appropriate. Otherwise, you'll be using your air conditioner more often than NatHERS tools predict, and you won't achieve the full energy savings that your home is capable of. And if you don't have a ceiling fan, a cheap pedestal fan like this little critter is enjoying is the next best option. They use very little energy compared to an air conditioner. And when I lived in Darwin, I think we had ceiling fans in every room, and I also had about 4 pedestal fans placed around the place. Didn't have air conditioning, and they made the world of difference. All right. The last of the myths that I wanted to bust. Thermal mass isn't rewarded. So this is another fairly persistent one, often linked to the esky myth that only lots and lots of insulation is rewarded. NatHERS tools know how different building materials resist the movement of heat through them, but they also know how heat is absorbed and released by them. These are the thermal mass properties of the material that NatHERS recognises. In this picture, the fact that the sun's heat is being absorbed by the polished concrete floor and limestone feature wall is all accounted for. The tool will also then account for the fact that those materials will slowly release that heat once the sun has moved on. So a good house design should feature both insulation and thermal mass. A NatHERS accredited assessor will help the building designer get this balance right, so get them involved early in the planning process. There've been again, some of the questions that came through prior to the, we got them yesterday, I think. There were a number of very specific questions about, is double glazing of windows worth it? So as I hope you'll now appreciate, the software and the rating process are extremely complex. The software looks at the combined effect of all of the variables I've mentioned and more, which I haven't. So making general statements about one feature is difficult. The trick is get your accredited NatHERS assessor in early. They can actually experiment with the house design and advise you on the most cost-effective changes. Sometimes, for instance, double glazing or double glazed windows will give you a good bang for your buck, but under different circumstances, they may not. So yeah, can't urge you enough to get the designer, the assessor in early in the design process. Excuse me. I might ask for some results of how, I'd be interested to see how many people have seen their certificate, but while that's being tallied, I might have another quick audience poll. How many of you are active users like NatHERS assumes? Like, and it's not perfect. You don't, you know, we don't, NatHERS doesn't expect that you're there with a thermometer, monitoring indoor and outdoor temperature and opening the curtain or the window at the split second it changes. So I'm sure my wife is now watching going, yeah, Dave actually does that. It's a bit painful. But most of it, you know, NatHERS doesn't assume that we're on the ball like that. So how many of you can honestly say that you open and close windows, open and close curtains like you should, and go for that ceiling fan like in this picture before you actually turn the air conditioner on? I'll be interested to know. All right. So my next session, and I'm almost there. This is about the future of NatHERS. Talking about two elements in particular: the move to whole of home ratings and being able to rate existing homes. So the first slide I have here is talking about the trajectory for low energy buildings. So in February of last year, the energy ministers agreed on the trajectory for low energy buildings, a national plan that sets a trajectory towards zero energy and carbon ready buildings for Australia. Excuse me. Now, I should just explain what this, a little bit about this trajectory and what we mean by zero energy and carbon ready buildings. So essentially, the government has not decided on what that endpoint is exactly and when it will be. So what the trajectory does is it set us on the right path, because there are a lot of complexities about it that we don't know the answer to yet. So the trajectory sets us on a path where we start moving towards that sort of vague goal of zero energy. Now, we're not even sure what zero energy will necessarily look like yet, exactly what it will look like, because we still need to work through issues like, how do you get a zero energy apartment when you've got no roof because you're the first floor on the of a 50-story apartment block. So there's all those sorts of things, as well as, if everyone rushes out and puts solar on right away, what are the effects going to be on the energy network and the distribution network? So as those things are sorted through by government, this document sets us on the trajectory that will get us really close to where we need to be, so that when the final destination is decided on and agreed to, we'll be pretty close to it. So that's why we've called it a trajectory. Then later in 2019, in November, energy ministers then agreed on the addendum to the trajectory for low energy buildings, and this was to cover existing buildings. So just a couple of the highlights. Basically, the original trajectory talked about things like it proposed increases to energy efficiency provisions for NCC 2022. It suggested we expand NatHERS to offer nationally accredited whole of home tools, and I'll expand on that in a minute. It also agreed to consider options for improving existing buildings, which is what happened later in the year, but that initial one was just for new buildings. So then the existing building document, it sets out a framework for improving the energy efficiency of existing buildings. Unlike the new construction, improving existing buildings requires action at multiple points throughout the building's life. The addendum organises policy measures around 3 streams of enabling mechanisms, targeted building policies and supporting measures. So it's quite a comprehensive scheme. I won't go into it in too much detail, but there is the link there that if you want to have a look at those documents, you can. But I suppose that they are live documents, and they're occurring right now. You know, ABCB in their look at for what we should do for NCC 2022 have taken their lead from this trajectory, and as I mentioned earlier, they are considering moving, as one of the measures, moving to 7 stars as the regulatory minimum for new homes. I'll now just go into that whole of home energy rating tool a little bit more. This has been worked on now by colleagues here in the department. So basically, it's sorry, I lost my notes. There they are. So work is underway on this right now, and essentially, as I mentioned earlier in the talk, May next year is the beginning of the public consultation process that ABCB will be running for changes for 2022, and we're hoping to have a tool ready, a NatHERS tool ready for people to start looking at a NatHERS rating that not only has a star rating for the thermal shell to demonstrate compliance to those thermal shell requirements, just as they are now, but also to include those regulated appliances, which are the green ones on this, pool pumps, lighting, hot water, and heating and cooling appliances. You know, we're hoping that this NatHERS whole of home tool will be able to demonstrate compliance to that. But we also have, you know, other things for it. You know, we want to be able to help designers move towards, you know, who are keen on moving towards zero energy homes already. They can use this as a design tool and show how you can go beyond minimum standards. The finance sector are interested in it for green loan products and investment portfolio risk assessments. We can also use such a tool for disclosure of energy performance for existing buildings. You know, so some of those trajectory policies are considering options such as optional or mandatory disclosure, and even minimal requirements for rental buildings. So such a tool could help demonstrate compliance to some of those policy proposals. So yeah, and then we've also got some of these future or potential future modules that we would like to add. All of the ones around this circle, we've basically got a test tool ready to go that uses, you know, the thermal rating or the thermal shell as the basis for what your heating and cooling appliances will have to supply. So, you know, for instance, if you had a 10-star thermal shell that's going to need almost no heating or cooling appliances, that will then feed into the values that are produced in this module. And if you have a 7-star shell or a 6-star or whatever the minimum ends up being, you know, obviously you're going to have higher heating and cooling loads, and the energy use of this these appliances will be greater. So the idea here is that you know, we could produce a flexible way of demonstrating you know, that you can meet low energy sort of requirements by either, you know, going for a minimal shell and really good appliances, or a really good shell and, you know, average appliances. That could be the type of flexibility that this tool could allow. And of course, you know, then you've also got the other, you know, you can play with how much energy the hot water system is going to use. And there is also the on-site energy generation module that shows you how, you know, you can potentially offset the use of those appliances through it. So that's quite an exciting development that hopefully, you know, we will have that released one day, and that other, like we do with the thermal software, that there'll be other tools, not just the CSIRO benchmark accurate version of this. There'll be other tools that can demonstrate through an accreditation process that they can match our benchmark accurate tool. All right. So that was basically it. I will be here for questions later, but I suppose thank you everyone. I hope I hope you got something out of that. And I will pass back over to Anna.
Hi there. Thank you very much for that. That was extremely interesting, and the questions have been flooding in, so great. Some of them have been being answered by our behind-the-scenes team and Anthony while he was waiting, so thanks very much, team. We're running a little bit behind, so I'm going to hand straight over to Anthony. If you'd just like to turn on your camera and your microphone, Anthony, and join me here.
Sure, you seem to have stopped my video, so I can't turn it back on, but I'll start sharing my screen.
Okay, hopefully
there
someone...
we go, got it.
There we are. Okay, go ahead with the screen share.
All right, welcome everyone, and thanks, Dave. I've been given my marching orders. I have till 8:05, so I'm going to tear through all of this. My name's Anthony Wright. I'm the research lead for the Building Simulation Assessment and Communications Cluster at CSIRO, which basically gives me oversight of all the residential energy efficiency work. I'm going to talk about modelling, not rating, and a bit about the research and development trajectory that CSIRO is on at the moment in this space. Okay, so the NatHERS software doesn't just produce compliance certificates. I wish more people knew this. What you can see on your screen there, there's a little moving GIF, and you should be able to see that that is basically modeling the movement of heat in that building. So the space that I've labeled 1 there is a living room. And you can see that as the sun moves around during the day, the heat moves it from pouring out the external walls to pouring into the interior of that house in the central zone in 2. If you then look down at the graphs below, graph 3 shows what the internal temperature of that room looks like with the blue line, what the external temperature looks like, the red line, and what the temperature in the ceiling cavity looks like, which is the green line. Mess around with that model a little bit, change a few of the windows, add some shading and some insulation, play with it a little bit, and what you will find is that you can get it to look like graph 4, which shows, again, the blue line as the interior temperature, the red line as the exterior, and the green line as the temperature in the roof cavity. So you can do this kind of analytic work with the software. Zone by zone free running analysis is what we call this. It's a great way of actually looking at your house, deciding what's where the flaws are and where the problems are, and rectifying them long before you get to the stage of building them in permanently. You can do heat flow analysis. You can look at hot periods versus cold periods and decide where you're having the weaknesses. And you can model PVs and appliances as well, even in current iterations of the software. And even though the NatHERS scheme and the National Construction Code don't look at those things at the moment. Each software package will offer different services, and so different energy raters will have access to different things. The graphs I'm showing you here are from First Rate 5, actually, not from Accurate, CSIRO's tool, but we have a range of different tools in our software. So a little bit on the science behind the software. CSIRO tries to undertake regular monitoring projects to ensure that the predicted software outputs are aligned with real-world data. Dave's already talked about some of the behavioural assumptions and the occupancy assumptions that the NatHERS scheme builds in. If you correct for those and say, all right, well, we're going to turn on our thermostat when the occupants of the house actually turn on their thermostats, and basically build an occupancy model that matches what people actually do, you can see the results of the correlation between modelled and actual results in those two graphs. So the graph on the left with all the blue dots looks at modelled energy on the horizontal axis and actual energy use on the vertical axis. And there's an R² value of 0.84, which is exceptionally good. You can have a look on the right and see where the discrepancies are. And essentially they are in plug load appliances, which are very hard to predict based on individual households, and in air conditioning, which is another area it's quite difficult to predict user behaviour. So we undertake real-world studies to evaluate the impact of the NatHERS scheme as well. So applying all of those behavioural characteristics, do we still lead to a reduction in energy consumption? So our largest study is quite old these days, 5 or 6 years old. Used a cohort of 414 houses in Melbourne, Adelaide and Brisbane, and compared pre and post 5-star houses. 6-star had not been around long enough to do the analysis on 6-star. So we found that basically a 5-star house compared to a pre-5-star house had the reductions that you can see on screen. Summer cooling impacts were more ambiguous, but not statistically significant. And we'd love to do some more work on summer cooling. It's pretty obvious that air conditioning is an area where the whole scheme does need to look at a little bit more. So we also use the data collected in energy ratings. So when that certificate on the left is generated, it goes into a database that CSIRO owns via a rather circuitous route most of the time. From that database, we generate a number of outputs. The bottom screenshot that you can see there with the link is the Australian Housing Data Portal. So we do visualizations of all of the ratings that go into that system, and there's about 800,000 in there, stretching back about 5 years now. So you can really see how things have changed state by state, postcode by postcode, and really analyze the impacts of the NatHERS scheme. That data is also used by the NatHERS administrator, Dave's team, and their consultants, and the Australian Building Codes Board and their consultants to develop new policy and regulations and to make sure we're targeting regulations at the right things. We also use the data internally at CSIRO to do research and publish papers. We use it for tool development. We use it for science communications and for industry development as well. And sometimes this leads to interesting new insights. So we asked the question of the data about 1.5 years ago, is new housing in low socioeconomic areas likely to perform worse thermally than housing in richer areas? And counterintuitively, at least for me to begin with, the answer was it seems that poorer areas might benefit disproportionately. The average star rating is higher in lower socioeconomic areas than it is in higher socioeconomic areas. So we dug into the data a bit more, and you can see the graphs on the right that this outcome is largely determined by the fact that, obviously, in the end, people in higher socioeconomic areas not only build bigger, but they also really push the boundaries of how much glass the minimum standards will let you put in a building. So people in higher socioeconomic areas are really pushing the bottom end of performance to get maximum glazing, is what that little investigation of the data showed us. So Dave and I have presented so far a reasonably positive picture of the whole NatHERS scheme. Is it all rainbows and unicorns? Probably not. There are several known issues with the software and with NatHERS, but they're not always what people think they are. Some we're working on now, I should say now, not many, and a few will require a bit more time. I'm going to discuss some of these in a bit more detail after this slide, but I'll go through them very quickly now. We're looking at improving our concrete slab on ground modelling, particularly as it relates to the water table. This is something that's not done particularly well in any of the international software. We think we've got a world-beating model, but last time we ran it on a standard computer, it took about 4 days to do the model. So we decided that was probably unacceptable and are trying to improve the performance of that model now. Overheating and Australian comfort standards. There's some evidence that the minimum standards are leading to some apartments in particular overheating in summer. One of the problems with that is that we don't have Australian comfort standards, believe it or not. We need to use the European ones. And as Dave rightly pointed out, what's comfortable in one place is not necessarily comfortable in another. And the European standards are not particularly appropriate to the Australian climate. So developing some Australian comfort standards so that we could set those thermostat settings more accurately in the NatHERS scheme would be fantastic. Occupancy settings, we could probably tweak those and improve them. They are very hard to research, and you've got to imagine you have to look at how people use their houses in 69 different climates in a statistically significant way in order to arrive at appropriate occupancy settings for the whole country. Weather file issues, a few people raised questions about whether the weather files account for climate change and so on. As Dave pointed out, the weather files are based on past weather data, not on future projections. We can't currently model heat recovery ventilation. So sometimes passive houses where there's very little natural ventilation and it relies on heat recovery ventilation might not rate particularly well in NatHERS, which is something we can and should work on. Modeling blower door test results. At the moment, the software uses dynamic air infiltration. So it calculates a pressure coefficient from the wind on every plane of the house and then determines how much air is leaking around every window frame individually. However, the industry likes to put a blower door test on, control for all variables, pressurize the house to 50 pascals and measure the air change rate. It would be good to have that air change rate data able to be input into the software. And we have got models that will work on that and are working on how to bring them to market. Thermal bridging is something we're also working on. At the moment, there's an inbuilt assumption around thermal bridging, but we're hoping to bring that to the surface and to surface some differences between steel framing and timber framing and so on. We can't model winter gardens. So when I say winter gardens, I mean kind of attached greenhouses on the side of houses. They don't model well in our software at the moment. We can't model phase change materials. Indoor pools present a problem because of the massive heat loads, the humidity and moisture in there, and because they're often highly glazed structures. Condensation management, we are working on condensation management tools, but as Dave rightly pointed out, NatHERS will not be the silver bullet here. We're going to need a range of interventions. We think we can provide kind of warnings about when there's a risk of condensation inside the building fabric, but that's probably as far as NatHERS will be able to go. And free running buildings. So there were a few questions about that, and I've got some pictures on the side because I'm sure there are some earth builders and some free running tropical designers in the audience. If you design a building that does not require heating and cooling, generally NatHERS is going to be a tricky option for you. NatHERS will always assume that there's heating and cooling in the building, and fundamentally it does that because people can install it the minute they walk in. Now, for a number of clients who genuinely do not want heating and cooling and who will genuinely run their houses in a really active way and who will probably tolerate a wider degree of temperatures than the average person, that can be an impediment to them having the house of their dreams. The ABCB is working on some options around that at the moment, but I don't have an immediate answer for that particular problem. So, sorry, I know I'm racing through this. I'm sure your questions are rolling in, and I'll try and answer them at the end. I've got a few more slides to get through in only 1 minute. We're always trying to improve how we model various aspects of the dwelling. Comfort standards, I've already mentioned most of this. The one thing I will mention is we know the water table has a pretty profound effect on the performance of a house. For most people, that won't matter because the water table's low enough under their house, or far enough away under their house that it doesn't impact the performance of their slab. In the areas on that map around Melbourne, that is not the case. And at the moment, we're not modelling that particularly well, and we would like to be. So what else does the future hold? I won't do that. We are building whole of house tools for Dave's team. He's already spoken about that, so I might move on and try and answer those questions in the question area. We are putting our benchmark tool in the cloud. We released an alpha version in May this year, and a beta release to Accurate users will be available next year. That will allow us to do API development with a range of different front-end providers. We're already working with one called Magic Plan that you can see on the right. Magic Plan is a fantastic little app that's used to generate those floor plans you see on realestate.com and Domain, or whatever your real estate platform is in your state. It basically uses an AI to find the corners of the buildings and build a three-dimensional model. It automatically detects windows and doors with incredible accuracy. And then you can install drop-down menus over the top of that so that you can you can add the insulation and material properties. We are interfacing with that at the moment, so hopefully we'll be able to do very, very quick ratings of existing buildings shortly. Being in the cloud allows us to do stock modeling as well. I won't talk about all of the benefits of this, but you can see by the graph on the right, if you have the ability to calculate thousands of modeling runs simultaneously and compare to a cost matrix, you can look for the lowest cost compliance out of a whole range of different options, modifying all of the parameters that go into the software. So that should be available towards the end of next year. Stock modeling will also be available. So for policy development purposes and so on, we will be able to dip into our database of ratings and draw out, say, 10,000 houses and say, well, what would happen if we insisted that the insulation in the ceilings on all of those houses was R6? And we can have a look at the impact of that as a policy decision on a geographic area or on a type of housing or whatever else. So we get much, much more targeted policy and the ability to have a much better and cheaper regulations. We're also building error and fraud detection into the system. Cloud Accurate will provide not only in software advice, tooltip advice, and so on to energy raters, but it will also allow us to identify suspicious certificates and automatically report to auditors and those kind of things. We are also building a security app that will provide a three-way link between the app, the certificate generation portal for NatHERS certificates, and the QR code, meaning it's impossible to fake a certificate. I don't think certificates are being faked much anymore, but we did come across anecdotal accounts of that happening a few years ago, and so all of this has been built in response to that. We're also building a neural network to very, very quickly give rough energy ratings. So I won't go into how a neural network works, but essentially it will allow from a small number of parameters, a designer or a homeowner or a builder to estimate what a star rating would be for a design and get very, very quick feedback. Climate modelling, we've developed some new future climate files that we will release by the end of this year. That will allow energy raters to rate your house under 3 climate change RCP scenarios, so RCP 2.5, 4.5 and 8.5 at various intervals out to 2090. So you'll be able to see how your house might perform in 40 or 50 years or 20 years compared to now. And existing housing. All of the advances that I've just talked about will be available in the models that we are developing, such as Magic Plan and the neural network and so on, to make the rating of existing houses much, much faster and correlated with the NatHERS software. At the moment, it's prohibitively expensive to do a NatHERS rating on an existing house because you need to draw up the plans. We hope by the end of next year to have solved that problem. So that's it for me. That was very, very fast, I appreciate, and I'm still over time, so I will hand back to Renew and hopefully be able to answer some of your questions.
Well done, Anthony. We've got a couple of people hoping that a full, not rushed version of your presentation might become available as a recording. So perhaps we'll get you to sit down and run through it in your own time.
Sure. And I'm happy to provide the slides as well, so that's fine if anyone needs them.
Very, very interesting. Thanks so much. Okay, let's dive into some questions. The first, I'm just trying to actually find some questions that you haven't already covered between the two of you. You've done a great job of a lot of content. So yes, a lot of people have been asking about the fact that NatHERS is a theoretical rating of a house design, and what can be done to ensure that the actual as-built house meets what is rated, you know, what's on the NatHERS certificate.
Do you want to feel
that? Talk about any
sure.
potential discrepancies between the NatHERS certificate and what actually got built, and what can people do to verify if there are any differences?
Yeah, well, look, this is an issue for sure, and you know the rules at the state and territory level around this are a little bit loose. I suppose we go to great pains, or the assessor does hopefully go to great pains to create an accurate assessment, and then they're not, the plans or the assessment specifications aren't always followed when the house is actually built, and it is. Generally speaking, it is the certifier, whoever's working in that state, territory, or quite often down to the council level. It is the certifier who is, or surveyor they're called in some parts of the country, is supposed to sign off that the house does meet all of these requirements, but not just the NatHERS certificate, that the electrical wiring is done safely, the plumbing's done properly, the gas is all safe and done properly, the house isn't going to fall over, and energy efficiency is just one of the things that surveyor or certifier is supposed to check. And unfortunately, there is anecdotal evidence that sometimes energy efficiency is down their priority list and gets a cursory glance. So I suppose, we certainly do work with the state and territories, to try and encourage that these things are done properly. Various state and territories are looking at this issue to varying degrees. The Victorian government has certainly been doing a large study, or still are doing a large study on as-built compliance. The ACT government that was just re-elected has sort of recommitted to ensuring that this is done better, as-built compliance. As an individual, I suppose, like I said during my talk, to really try and get your hands on that NatHERS certificate. You have a right to get that certificate, and if you're not given that certificate, that should start to probably ring alarm bells for you, because that could be an indication that someone's trying to hide something. You can always, you should also have those house plans, and so you can start to check whether what is in the house plans and what is on the certificate is actually what's in your building. So yeah, that's, and you can get people to help that you do that. You don't have to do it yourself. There are accredited assessors who can help you, evaluate what you've got compared to what you were promised. And quite often it's consumer law that then might be kicked in there if you were, if it's below regulation, there's regulatory implications. If it's a non-compliant house, that's one course. But if you were promised a 9-star house or something and you only got an 8-star house, sure, it's good, but you didn't get what you paid for. So there are avenues in consumer law there that you can also pursue.
And at the risk of being inundated by grumpy homeowners, we will release NatHERS certificates from the CSIRO database under Freedom of Information. That sounds incredibly onerous. It's actually not for the person applying. It's actually a quick email. It takes about 2 weeks for us to process it. I'm hopeful we can make that a much easier process in future, but there's a whole lot of privacy requirements and legals that have to be dealt with before I can. So if you're busting to see whether there's a NatHERS certificate for your house, you can get in touch with us via the ahd.csiro.au platform. There's a contact us form and ask if we've got your certificate. And if we do, I can show you how to do a Freedom of Information request and get that certificate, which is not a bad place to start.
That's a really good tip. Thanks very much, Anthony. Next question, does the NatHERS system still make it easier to comply with a large cubicle, say 2-storey house, than with a house with a smaller area with courtyards, good cross ventilation, designed to not need air conditioning? Or just generally a more complex shape, I guess is probably the question.
In general, a complex shape can be harder to comply because it's got a greater surface area to volume ratio, and that's what the difference is. So for 500 cubic meters of house interior, you might have quite a large perimeter and quite a lot of external building fabric to lose heat from. A compact design is going to be easier to rate because the ratio is better. You've got the same amount of space inside, but you've got less external fabric to lose heat through. That said, that's advice that kind of applies more in a cool temperate climate where I am down in Victoria, and might not apply up in the tropics or somewhere else. The software is quite sophisticated in how it understands negative pressure in courtyards and air movement and those kinds of things. So it will accommodate your courtyards and all of those things, and it should accurately model the way air moves through that building. So if you're designed for good cross ventilation, and good cross ventilation is what it will take in your climate to be comfortable, then you should get a good rating.
Okay, great. Did you have anything you wanted to add to that, David, or move on to the next question?
I'll just quickly, I suppose, on the issue of that surface area to volume. So there are, people often ask about the difference between a large house and a small house. We actually have an area correction factor built into the software or into the star rating algorithm, so that larger houses with their large volume to surface area advantage over a small house, that we try and even that out. Possibly don't do it perfectly, but we certainly try to even out that difference between small houses and large houses.
Yep, thank you. I'm just a bit distracted by trying to pass the questions here. Next question is, how is NatHERS dealing with condensation in regard to materials? I know we did touch on this very briefly. Some materials such as reflective foil shouldn't be used in a Melbourne scenario due to condensation and mould buildup, for example, but are still being specified and recommended by First Rate, says this question asker here. So yeah, the overall question is, how is NatHERS dealing with condensation?
NatHERS doesn't at the moment. Condensation is dealt with through a different area of the National Construction Code. So it is incumbent on the builder and the certifier and the rater to come up with a solution that is going to meet the energy efficiency provisions and not cause condensation. We acknowledge that that is a problem, particularly as houses get tighter and tighter in terms of the building fabric. And so we are working with Victoria Uni to try and build an open source condensation modelling tool, the aim of which will be to essentially give energy raters a sense of the risk that they're building into that design, into that specification for insulation. Nothing in this space is perfect though. Condensation is incredibly complex and we'll only ever deal with it within the wall structure, not inside the house. So you could still get, you know, moldy carpet in your house, but we'll try and give you a risk rating about when you'll get mold in the framing and in the roof space and those kind of things. But as I said, it is very complicated. There's kind of the world's best practice kind of approach is to use software that's called Woofy. Woofy is very, very complicated to use and quite expensive to purchase as well. You really need to be a bit of an expert to understand what it's telling you. And so we're hoping we can simplify that a little bit, but I think Dave put it best earlier, NatHERS is not the silver bullet here. This is going to come down to good requirements in the National Construction Code, some warnings in NatHERS and education of the building industry and surveyors.
Multifaceted approach, multi-pronged approach. Indeed. And so what is an optimal star rating to aim for to balance the construction costs versus the building lifetime benefits?
Dave might disagree. I reckon somewhere between 7.5 and 8.5 stars, depending on your climate zone. If you're in a temperate climate where heating and cooling doesn't take up a lot of your annual energy bill, so somewhere on the mid to north coast of New South Wales and, you know, certain areas in Western Australia and so on, nice, beautiful temperate climates, the place we'd like to go on holidays, you probably don't need to go above 7.5 stars or won't find there's a good cost benefit to doing so. In colder climates, definitely higher star ratings, and we're already seeing the average in places like Canberra and Tasmania is over 7 stars. So, you know, people are voting with their feet in those cold places that this works and they're getting the right outcome there. But somewhere between 7.5 and 8.5 and above that, whacking PV on your house is probably going to be cheaper to offset your remaining energy consumption than investing more in the fabric.
And next question is, where and how do I find an accredited assessor and how much does it cost?
The NatHERS website has links to the 3 current accreditation bodies, so ABSA, Design Matters National, and HERA, that's HERA. If you go onto their sites, they 2 of them have lists of accredited assessors and where they are. HERA, I think last time I checked, they prefer that you contact them, tell them what you want, where you live, and they'll send you a list of local ones.
And I might add to that, be aware that assessors, like any industry, and I answered this question to someone a bit earlier, target their work. So some of them build businesses around being a high volume, low margin business and tend to do multi-story apartment blocks very, very quickly. Lots of repetition built into their work, not a lot of detail work, not a lot of feedback. Others target high-end architects and do very, very detailed work and will work with the architect for months over the design process to ensure they get the right outcome for the client. Obviously, there's going to be a price difference. I mean, I've seen ratings for repetitive apartments being delivered as low as $30 plus the certificate fee, and bespoke architect designed houses, the full service rate are costing upwards of $2,000 or $3,000. It depends what you want, I suppose. If you just want a regulatory tick and flick that shows you're going to get 6 stars and you want to do it for as cheap as possible, then there are raters who will cater to that need. If you want someone who's going to deliver you the most comfortable house you can possibly have within your budget and the parameters of your site and what you want to build, then you'll need to pay more for that. but how much is it worth to pay to know your house is going to be comfortable to live in, and that the person has done the appropriate training and is really going to concentrate on your needs and deliver a really bespoke service?
Shop around is the answer.
Yeah.
Yeah, as with most things. Is it possible to get a NatHERS certificate pre and post home renovation?
Yes. And in fact, Anthony, you might add to that, but I think that's part of the Victorian requirements for some renovations is you get it done before and then after, I think.
There's still design ratings at that point. So you rate the existing fabric and then you rate the proposed plans. You can get a NatHERS assessor to come back and have a look at your house and get a second one to come back after the first one's done your design rating after you've built the house, if you like, but they face a few problems. One is at the moment, the software kind of requires you to have a floor plan. So provided you've got that, they can work quite quickly. If you don't, they have to draw one up, which can be expensive. And they also can't see what's in your walls. So they have to rely on being told what's in there and to a degree rely on the fact that it's been installed correctly. There are assessors out there who'll go around with a thermal camera and check your insulation and make sure there are no gaps. And certainly if you get someone to do that, you can go back to your builder and say, hey, look, there's bits of the walls that have no insulation in them, fix it up for me. But you will be paying for that service as well. But there are people out there who do it. The other alternative, which is not the same as getting another NatHERS rating, but is to get a Victorian residential res scorecard assessment, which will give you an assessment on a different tool about how that house performs. However, it's got the same problems. It'll make assumptions about what insulation is in your walls and ceilings where the assessor can't see.
Somebody's asking about, they're saying that they're considering building with a volume builder, and can they engage an assessor to review the design and our floor plan variations?
You can certainly ask to. The volume builder will have to provide the plans and specifications to the energy rater, which is the only problem. If they refuse, I would be pretty suspicious. It's, you're the client, and if you want to go and use your own energy rater, then and they're delivering a compliant house, then I don't see why they would want to prevent you. But it's really up to them. If they won't provide you with those plans and specifications, then the energy rater won't have the information they need to do the job.
Worthwhile pursuing.
Definitely worth asking. I'd always ask them. And they may have done one already themselves and used an energy rater, and you might want to ring that energy rater and have a discussion with them about it. You might find they're great and they've done exactly the right thing and you've got a really well-performing house. Volume builders are not necessarily bad. There are some that are delivering consistently above minimum standard houses with really good build quality.
I just put in a little plug for the last issue of Sanctuary magazine there. We ran 2 articles on how to make volume builds more, actually 3 articles on how to make volume builds more sustainable, what you can do as a client. So I encourage everybody to go get their hands on a copy of Sanctuary 52.
Sorry, I'll slide back with better light now. I can't see my own red head any longer.
That's much better. So getting back to the design for place free home plans that I think it was you touched on in your presentation, David. Somebody's asking if they use one of the free Your Home Design for Place 7-star designs, do they still need to hire a NatHERS assessor, or does the design come with a NatHERS certificate already?
No, they would still have to generally, to show compliance with their local regulations, would generally require a site-specific NatHERS certificate because, each capital city, well, most of them have multiple climate zones. So depending what part of the capital city you're building in, it could be different. You may have to face yours slightly a different way. There might be a massive building shading you, on the next block. So every certificate is supposed to be site specific.
Okay, of course. So it's not an assessment just of the design itself. It's the design on that site.
Yes, very, very site specific, but at least you'll have a very good starting point to get you to that 7 stars or beyond.
Yes, that's another thing, is that it's perfectly possible to take those design for place plans, as I understand, and tweak them to make them even higher performing than the sort of basic standard.
Absolutely, and in fact, one of them there, there's some variations, and one of the Perth ones is a double brick with insulation. Does variation of it, and it's from memory, it's about 8.2 stars in the Perth. So as a fairly, and like I said before, none of them have double glazing. So if you want to pull out the big guns and put some flash windows there, you're going to end up with much higher ratings again, more than likely.
We just got time for a couple more questions. One is about indoor window coverings, curtains, blinds, pelmets, and so on. Are they considered by NatHERS? They can play a role in passive solar design, of course, but wondering whether they're considered by NatHERS, and if not, why not?
Yeah, sure. So at the moment, we do include a blind in the rating, and we assume that you open and close it appropriately, but it's just a Holland blind, sort of a very basic Holland blind. Yes, we know that better window coverings, pelmets, insulated curtains and blinds perform better, but we haven't currently got that functionality in there because it's not considered as part of the building fabric, for one thing, and we just haven't allowed it, and plus we wanted a standardized thing that we can compare basic house designs to basic house designs. But it is something that we are looking at as we move towards existing home ratings. It would be good to be able to demonstrate the difference in an existing home where there is, for a rental property, for instance, the house with the honeycomb blinds is going to perform better than the house with the Holland blind, all things being equal. So that would be worthwhile as showing, I think. So it's on the cards for a future change.
Excellent. Okay, I think we're pretty much, that sort of wraps it up. Anthony and David, thank you very much. We're getting very close to time. So I'm just going to, well, that's all I have time for tonight. Thank you for sharing your time and expertise. Thank you very much to all our attendees for tuning into this session as part of the Sustainable House Day Extension Series. You can find out more about Sustainable House Day by visiting sustainablehouseday.com. It's over for this year now, but we'll be back again next year in September. If you enjoyed this discussion, be sure to check out the 170 homes that featured in Sustainable House Day 2020. You'll find virtual tour videos for many of the open homes this year on our website, as well as details of their sustainable features, including one that was built using Design for Place plans in Inverloch in Victoria. If you have questions that we weren't able to answer tonight, you can comment on our online house profiles to ask questions of homeowners and designers that were involved in Sustainable House Day directly. Again, just reiterating that Sustainable House Day is organised by Renew, a not-for-profit that inspires, enables and advocates for sustainable living in Australia. Renew publishes 2 magazines on sustainable technology and homes, Renew Magazine and of course Sanctuary Magazine. You can find out more about the organisation and become a member at renew.org.au, and we'd welcome your support. Before closing, we'd like to acknowledge our sponsors and our Renew staff, volunteers and interns who have made this whole event possible. And once again, I thank you for being here with me tonight, Anthony and David, and thank you to everybody who joined in and listened. Bye for now.
Thanks, everyone. Bye.
Thanks, everyone. See ya.